Mr. Bunn, in your testimony, I think you laid out the success of the 2017 tax reform by saying that we pretty well stopped inversions and we had an enormous amount of repatriation of earnings. I mean, weren't those two primary goals of the 2000 tax reform?
I would say those were part of it. Additional growth and investment in the U.S., in addition to bringing those earnings back and broadening the base, were also, kind of part of the goals.
Now, I think one of the goals of what we're trying to do here is we want to maintain the freedom of individuals to be able to invest globally wherever they want to invest, right? And isn't that the problem we're grappling with here? Because people have that freedom, they're going to invest where it makes most economic sense for them to do so. So we have to create incentives for them to invest here. My problem with the 2017 tax reform is we reformed the code, but we didn't take the opportunity to simplify and rationalize it. And that's what I'd like to talk about, because I mean, this discussion here today is unbelievably complex. I'm an accountant. My wife's an IRS agent. You guys might understand this. I don't think anybody listening to this possibly could. So I'm asking people to start thinking outside the box. You know, how can we simplify and rationalize this, recognizing the fact that we want to maintain the freedom of individuals to invest wherever they want to globally. And from my standpoint, the way we recognize revenue here is based on the power of our market. You know, Senator Cardin talked about a consumption tax. That'd be certainly one way to very simplify everything and make sure that we get our fair share, and people can't really game the system because you're going to tax consumption. Working with the Tax Foundation, you may or may not be aware of one thing I proposed back in 2017. 95% of American businesses close are pass-through entities. I don't think these problems exist that we're talking about here. I mean, I know this is a big deal, but let's beat up on Big Pharma, who I'm not a real fan of. But I don't think this really exists with pass-through entities, does it, these issues, in terms of international taxation?
There are different challenges for partnerships and pass-throughs, but usually the C Corps have different opportunities with the corporate code than what you would have with the individual code.
So again, my proposal was to turn all businesses into pass-through entities. In other words, maybe a simpler way of talking about it is tax all business income at the ownership level. It's entirely possible to do. There are some complications, but somehow 95% of American businesses figure out how to do it. We've talked to the shareholder services companies that service large corporations, that this would be a relatively simple thing for them to do versus other things they do for their big corporations. If you haven't, again, I wouldn't be surprised if you haven't really thought about this, but thinking about it now, would that be a possible solution here?
Senator, I like that you're thinking outside the box here because we like to do that at Tax Foundation as well. Earlier this year, we released a report on a type of corporate integration, which is similar to what you're proposing, that would tax business profits when they are distributed from the business and dramatically overhaul and do some base broadening on the individual side. But this would be a revenue positive and pro-growth reform that simplifies things dramatically. Our model for this is Estonia. We use a ranking of the tax codes of different countries around the world, and for years, Estonia has been at the top of our list. So we looked there for tax simplification proposals, and we modeled that for the U.S. economy, and like I said, it's revenue positive over the budget window and pro-growth. And I would recommend that you continue this work.
Okay. Mr. Morris, do you have any comments? Have you thought about this at all in terms of, again, how do you simplify and rationalize our tax code? And to me, that is the direction we ought to be moving. I mean, first talk about simplifying, rationalizing, and so many of these problems, I think, would go away.
Senator, it's a great question. I would agree with that in many ways. We take tax legislation, we then build something on top of that, we build something on top of that, and then we build something on top of that. We don't always take the time to strip stuff away and to figure out what might be sensible. I'm obviously biased here, but I do think occasionally stepping back and having a tax policy discussion about what makes sense as opposed to how we do the next thing would be appropriate. And again, I would just echo Mr. Bunn and thank you for doing that thinking.
Can I just give the other two witnesses an opportunity if you want to comment on simplifying and rationalizing our tax code and encouraging this committee to do that?
I will take you up on that. So I think without doubt, the tax code is exceedingly complicated, and I see that every day. I would say it didn't happen overnight, and it happened because taxpayers are creative. And we go back to the 30s, and we see the initial anti-abuse regime starting to be layered in as we try to figure out what to do. So it's a long-standing problem, and it's one that, collectively we as taxpayers, individual and corporate, have contributed to. With respect to your specific suggestion, pass-through, there's a lot of, I think I'll highlight two quick concerns, but, I think any sort of deeper conversation about reform is always important. A true pass-through is challenging, and I agree we do it now with many, many businesses, but we also see that our ability to audit complex partnerships is exceedingly poor at present. So if you move the remaining large multinationals into that structure, I'm not sure that we're going to land where we hope to be without other kinds of reform, either both partnership rules and IRS resources.
Well, I'm happy to scrape the hull of the ship of state clean rather than add an additional barnacle. So I'm happy to look at all this stuff in terms of simplification. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Langford's next, followed by Senator Casey.
Thank you to our witnesses. Thanks for being here to be able to walk through this. I've expressed a lot of concerns on just international tax and what Treasury is currently proposing with Pillar 2 especially. Lots of concerns here, and I apologize. We had some other things going on and was not able to hear some of the other conversation earlier on this. But I'm just going to ask some pointed questions on this and try to be able to figure out. Mr. Morris, I want to talk a little bit about just the international portion of this in the treaty aspects and the current treaties we have on tax